What if I told you that the world's biggest economic argument, capitalism versus socialism, is built on a misunderstanding? What if the question, which system works better, has never actually been answered, not because the debate is too complicated, but because neither system has ever existed in its pure form? Consider this. The United States, often celebrated as the champion of free market capitalism, built much of its wealth on government incentives, taxpayer-funded infrastructure, and interventions during every major crisis. Meanwhile, the Soviet Union, supposedly the ultimate socialist experiment, relied heavily on hidden black markets and underground profit incentives simply to keep its economy functioning. Even the so-called socialist countries of today, Denmark, Sweden, Norway, are some of the most capitalist nations in the world when it comes to business freedom, ease of entrepreneurship, and market competition. So, here's the mystery. If capitalism wasn't fully capitalist and socialism wasn't fully socialist, then what actually worked? And more importantly, what model is the world drifting toward, right now, whether by design or by accident? To understand that mystery, we need to rewind the story to a time before capitalism or socialism existed. For thousands of years, economies were feudal, small, localized, slow, controlled by monarchs and landowners. Wealth rarely changed hands, innovation barely moved, and life remained predictable and painfully poor. Then the Industrial Revolution erupted in the late 1700s and early 1800s. New machines replaced manual labor. Factories replaced farms. Cities grew at speeds humanity had never seen before. Millions of workers entered wage labor for the first time, forming a new kind of economic class. This transformation raised two opposite questions. The first, later embraced by capitalism, was, how can we unleash individual ambition to create unlimited growth? The second, embraced by socialism, was, if workers create everything, why are owners taking nearly all the wealth? These questions were the seeds of two ideologies that would dominate the next 200 years of global history. Enter Adam Smith, often labeled the father of capitalism, though he never used that word. In 1776, Smith argued that when markets are decentralized and competitive, when individuals pursue their own interests within a system of private property and free exchange, society tends to prosper. His ideas weren't meant to protect billionaires, they were meant to dismantle rigid feudal monopolies and open economic opportunity to anyone with talent and ambition. Decades later came Karl Marx, who witnessed the dark underside of early industrial capitalism: child labor, deadly factories, 16-hour workdays, and the brutal exploitation of workers. Marx predicted that capitalism would inevitably collapse under its own inequality and that workers would eventually take control of production. Both thinkers were responding to real problems, but their ideas were theories, blueprints, not realities. Reality would come next, and it would be far messier. The United States became the first large-scale capitalist nation, at least on paper. But here's the twist few people discuss. America was never a pure free market. From its early years, the government redistributed land, funded railroads, protected industries with tariffs, subsidized farmers, backed scientific research, and built much of the infrastructure that made business possible. At the same time, titans like Rockefeller, Carnegie, Vanderbilt, and J.P. Morgan dominated entire industries, creating both enormous growth and enormous inequality. By 1900, the United States was the richest country on earth, but also one of the most unequal, exactly as Marx predicted would happen in a capitalist system. Meanwhile, on the other side of the world, a completely different experiment was underway. After the Russian Revolution of 1917, the Soviet Union attempted to build the world's first fully planned socialist economy. Private property was abolished, markets were replaced by committees. Central planners set prices, quotas, and production targets for everything from nails to bread to tanks. At first, the Soviet system appeared to work shockingly well. Illiteracy plummeted. Industrial output skyrocketed. The USSR transformed from a largely agricultural backwater into a global superpower capable of competing with the United States. But the miracle came with hidden fractures, massive inefficiencies, endless shortages, bureaucratic dysfunction, lack of innovation, and a growing shadow economy that quietly became essential for survival. Central planning worked for simple tasks like steel production, but failed for complex ones like consumer goods and computing. Eventually, the weaknesses would widen into fatal cracks. Capitalism's breaking point came first. In 1929, the U.S. stock market crashed, triggering the Great Depression. Unregulated speculation had created a massive bubble. When it burst, 25% of Americans became unemployed. Thousands of banks collapsed, and millions of people lost their life savings. The invisible hand didn't guide the economy to stability, it froze. Pure capitalism had failed to correct its own extremes. Meanwhile, the Soviet Union continued its centralized march until it hit a wall decades later. By the 1970s and 1980s, the Soviet economy was stagnating. Without competition, innovation dried up. Without incentives, productivity collapsed. Bureaucracy smothered progress, and consumer goods became a joke. What worked when the economy was small and simple no longer worked when it became large and complex. Pure socialism failed for the opposite reason. Pure capitalism failed, where capitalism lacked stability. So, CIALISM lacked adaptability. After the Great Depression, the United States didn't adopt socialism, but it didn't return to laissez-faire capitalism either. Instead, America created a hybrid model: Social Security, financial regulation, unemployment insurance, public infrastructure, worker protections, strong unions, affordable education, and state-backed mortgages. From 1945 to 1975, this mixed system produced the most prosperous era in American history. Inequality dropped. The middle class expanded. Innovation exploded. Productivity soared. It was capitalism, but capitalism with guardrails. Meanwhile, the Soviet Union entered its decline. Reform attempts like glasnost and perestroika came too late. In 1991, the USSR collapsed, splitting into 15 nations. Millions fell into poverty. Lifespans dropped sharply. The economy crashed. In desperation, Russia attempted shock therapy capitalism, which created a new class of oligarchs who seized state assets and controlled almost every major industry. Once again, a pure ideological shift failed to create stability. Both systems, when pushed to extremes, had failed. But the world didn't learn the lesson. In the 1980s and 1990s, the United States began deregulating finance, reducing taxes on the wealthy, loosening antitrust enforcement, and cutting social programs. These changes reignited inequality. Today, CEOs earn over 300 times the average worker's salary. The richest 1% own more wealth than the bottom 90% combined. Housing is unaffordable for millions. Student debt exceeds credit card debt. Real wages have barely grown in decades despite record-breaking productivity. The same economic imbalances that fueled the Gilded Age and, later, the Great Depression have returned. At the same time, nations attempting socialism again, such as Venezuela, repeated the old mistakes: centralized control, inefficient production, corruption, and economic collapse. Ironically, the countries often labeled socialist by political commentators. Scandinavia and Western Europe are among the most capitalist economies on earth in terms of business freedom, global trade, and entrepreneurship. What makes them successful is not socialism, but balance. The modern world is now repeating old patterns. Global inequality has reached levels not seen since the 1920s. Housing markets are echoing the dynamics of the 2008 crash. Corporate consolidation is accelerating. A handful of companies dominate tech, media, and finance. Productivity has risen, while wages have stagnated. Youth unemployment is soaring in several regions. The signs mirror the late stages of both capitalism and socialism: concentration of power, declining mobility, public frustration, loss of trust, and political polarization. When economic systems become rigid and unequal, societies become unstable. History is whispering warnings as the pressure builds. So what actually worked? After 2 centuries of economic experiments, one conclusion appears stronger than any other: pure capitalism failed. Pure socialism failed. But mixed market capitalism with strong markets, strong social protections, and robust regulation proved more resilient than either extreme. The most successful nations balance the engine of the market with the safety of a social foundation. They encourage competition but prevent monopolies. They reward innovation but protect workers. They promote entrepreneurship but ensure basic needs. They invest in education, infrastructure, and mobility. They let markets create wealth, and governments distribute opportunity. This hybrid model powered the Nordic economies, post-war Japan and Germany, South Korea's rise, and America's mid-20th century boom. It is not socialism and not laissez-faire capitalism. It is a pragmatic blend built on evidence rather than ideology. If there is one lesson history teaches, it is that ideology destroys more than it creates. Every major economic collapse from 1929 America to 1991. USSR emerged when leaders clung to rigid theories instead of adapting to reality. Real prosperity comes from balance, not purity. And right now, the world is repeating the same mistakes: rising inequality, centralized corporate power, political division, debt crises, housing crises, declining trust, and rigid belief systems. Unless we learn from the past, the next crisis may force another transformation, whether we're ready for it or not. This brings us to 3 deep lessons worth remembering. First, no single ideology has ever worked in its pure form. Reality is too complex, too dynamic, too unpredictable. Systems must evolve, along with society. Second, the most successful economies in history balanced profit with protection, markets with fairness, and innovation with stability. Third, we are now drifting toward a new ideological conflict, one that mirrors the old debate but with even higher stakes. The next few decades will test whether societies can find balance again, or whether we'll repeat the mistakes that toppled past systems. The real danger today, isn't choosing capitalism or socialism, it's believing that only one system must win. Before the next economic shock, before the next political divide deepens, before the next ideological conflict fractures societies further, take a moment to understand the history that brought us here, because the future will belong to the societies that master balance and adaptability, not those trapped in old arguments. If you found this narrative valuable, informative, and worth more long-form analysis, make sure to hit the like button, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next deep dive into history, economics, and the unseen forces shaping our world. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.